All right. Welcome everybody to the Eastside Freedom Library. I do want to encourage you to sign. There is a clipboard with a sign-in sheet. There is a monthly electronic newsletter so that you can receive that and find out what else is going on here. Yesterday I visited with someone who asked me if there was life in the labor movement. I wish he was here tonight. Yeah, great. So what happened here was Jaz was coming to town primarily to do this Inside Organizer School, and we thought, let's do some other things while they're in town. And then, since I think our idea around here is if we have an author, we should have people engage with the author, and we managed to shake their publisher down for a few gratis copies of the book. There are other copies of the book that the sister from Subtext Books is selling in the back, and we want her to go back to the bookstore with nothing but checks and cash to carry. And so we thought about who might be good folks to put on a panel to engage with Jaz. And so you've met Carson Starkey, who's an organizer with the Carpenters and very involved with the Emergency Workers Organizing Committee. Jeremy Bishop. I tell people now that I know Jeremy, who works at the Department of Motor Vehicles. So like, if you ever need an in at the Department of Motor Vehicles, there's your person. And Jeremy is an activist with AFSCME Local 2822. And obviously more, since he showed me pictures of his speaking yesterday at the Hennepin County Medical Center rally that several AFSCME locals put on. We have Jane Hornsby, who is a middle school teacher and on the bargaining committee for the Minneapolis Federation of Educators. We have Atulia Dorolaski, right? Did I get that right? Yeah. Who was part of the only successful organizing campaign at Chipotle. And yeah, and maybe hopefully there will be more. And we have Caitlin Reed, who is an organizer with St. Paul Federation of Educators and a former elementary school teacher here in St. Paul. So what I've suggested, since I'm not going to give you a quiz as to whether you've read Jaz's book, and so Jaz is going to say a little bit about the book, and then I've asked the folks on the panel if they would talk about maybe one point in the book that connects with an issue that they've wrestled with in organizing, and we'll see where that gets us, and then it would be great to have more of you participate in the conversation. So, Jaz, please.
Well, it's so exciting to be here, and what an amazing event and space. I think having this kind of space in a Carnegie library would make Carnegie spin in his grave, which is exactly what we're after. Maybe we can do this to Howard Schultz's memorials later on, except that he's too greedy to actually make the memorials. But yeah, super excited to see everybody here and for all of the amazing labor events coming up. First time in the Twin Cities, and it's been fantastic so far. So to get, to the book, I wrote this book because I wanted more people to understand, what the process of organizing a union is like. More importantly, how they can do it in their own workplaces, how you can do it in your own workplaces, and to sort of demystify the practice of salting or getting a job at a non-union workplace with the goal of organizing it. Growing up, I'm originally from Texas. I was homeschooled K through 12. do not recommend. You need our educator friends to give you some social skills that maybe I had to acquire the hard way. But very conservative environment in a lot of ways, and so I didn't know really anything about the labor movement or unions or the fact that you could do this. And so I was radicalized largely by two things: becoming an atheist in the Deep South and by working at Panera Bread. And I think this is, actually, there's a lot of Panera Bread, Panera Bread worker to leftist pipeline stories, so I think that might be a universal experience. But when I became an atheist and started admitting that to myself and to the world that this was the case, I was living in East Tennessee, and I was a member of a homeschool 4-H chapter, which is not a good place to proclaim that you are an atheist. And so I immediately got accused of being a devil worshiper and of believing in evolution and all these things. And so around the same time, I got really into the Scopes monkey trial. And I was like, this is great. Like, I was memorizing the speeches within the play, and then I read Clarence Darrow's autobiography, and in it he talks about this really cool guy that he was like, this is the greatest guy ever, and that was Eugene Debs. I did not know about Eugene Debs, so I Googled Eugene Debs. First result was the Marxist Internet Archive, and it was Eugene Debs' speech to the jury that was about to convict him for encouraging draft resistance during World War I. And so I read, while there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. While there is a soul in prison, I am not free. And in a way, that changed my life. It was the first time I'd read anything about solidarity or the ways that these different struggles were connecting. I kind of lucked out in a way, I think. But I got really into the labor movement as a special interest. One of the few perks of being homeschooled is that you can really indulge your special interests. And so I learned everything about the labor movement up to about 1918. And I was like, this was great. This was so cool. I wish that this still existed. And then I got to college at the University of Mississippi, and this labor journalism professor, Joe Atkins, was like, hey, this does exist. In fact, you should meet my friend. And his friend was Richard Bensinger, who is working on the Nissan campaign. He'd been the organizing director at the AFL and then got fired for trying to organize too much, and then went to the UAW and was trying to convince the UAW at that time to throw their weight behind a campaign to get Nissan to actually recognize the right to organize. And so I started working on the Nissan campaign, and meeting workers who were trying to organize. It was incredibly eye-opening. It was the first time I'd actually seen this kind of struggle in real life. Workers were fighting a life and death battle, literally. Workers were dying in the plant. A worker named Derek Whiting had collapsed across the assembly line and died right before I had gotten involved with the campaign. Other workers were being told by management to override safety protocols. It was an incredibly oppressive environment, and the workers who were standing up against this were some of the most amazing people I'd ever gotten to interact with. It also really underscored to me how important winning the right to organize was. Nissan had hired a union-busting law firm called Littler Mendelsohn, which is one of the most notorious union-busting law firms in the country. And with Littler's help, they were trying to, implement every union-busting tool in the playbook. They were trying to divide workers along racial lines, along gender lines. They were telling white workers who were in the minority, you don't want to be part of a black-run union. They were trying to divide black workers against the white workers who were on the organizing committee. Right before the vote, these flyers went out that said, vote yes to this with Confederate flags and swastikas on them, vote no to the UAW. It was signed by the Sons of Confederate Veterans, which of course is a notorious white supremacist hate group. And Nissan never disavowed it, even when workers were sending them the flyer and showing it to management, being like, hey, is this you guys? So they, may not have created it, but they certainly created that climate. And the leverage to win the right to organize at Nissan existed, which is really key. Nissan was at that time owned by Renault, which was in turn majority stakeholder owned by the French Parliament. Nissan Renault was union around the world, every single factory except Tennessee and Mississippi. And when word got back to the French Parliament about what was going on in Mississippi, they subpoenaed Carlos Ghosn. This was before his shipping container extradition adventures, to come before Parliament and tell them what was going on. And he was like, we're not anti-union, we're union everywhere around the world, which was true except for Tennessee and Mississippi. So all of that to say, Nissan was marketing themselves as a very progressive company in an attempt to undercut the union. They were sponsoring all of these, pride parades, civil rights commemorations. They were trying to market themselves to a very young, progressive base. So we had the ability, I think, to drop the hammer and have a movement led by, church organizations, student groups, that was putting pressure on the company. And the UAW, which at that time was, dealing with their corruption scandals. The president at the time would go to jail shortly after on a similar time frame, actually, to Carlos Ghosn. But so the will to actually hold the company accountable wasn't there. Fast forwarding to Starbucks, which also had the same exact union-busting law firm, Littler Mendelsohn, a lot of the things were the same. You had this really progressive, in name, company that marketed itself as a different kind of company, wanted people to believe how great they were, that was doing everything it could to crush the union, whether that was, sending in the SWAT team, as they called it, of corporate executives to Buffalo to try to, flood stores, overwhelm people, stress people out, send 200 managers and executives to clock in at our stores and overwhelm the system, whether that was firing workers, closing stores, denying people benefits. And again, I think we are four years out from, almost 4 years out from the vote to win the first union store, which was the store that I was working at in Buffalo, along with Genesee Street on the same day. And, we still have no contract. There's about 650 union stores. Starbucks has been closing many of the union stores and continued acts of retaliation. But we should have a contract right now. And I think, it's a longer story, which I get into some in the book, about why we don't and where the union could have called the question much earlier on winning the right to organize, when the Memphis 7 were fired in Tennessee, which was our most racially diverse organizing committee, which had gone public on MLK Day asking Starbucks not to bring their union busting to Memphis, whether it was when they closed every Starbucks in Ithaca, New York, which was the first city in the country to have every Starbucks in the town become unionized. But this has been an ongoing question of control of the campaign between the workers, between the folks who were instrumental in setting up the campaign, and then between the international union, which has had a very different view in a lot of cases of what the strategy should be. So I think, I want people to learn from what we did right and how they can replicate, some of the same tactics that helped us win in the first place at Starbucks, but then also learn from the mistakes that we made and, hopefully be able to call that question earlier so that workers actually can win the right to organize and not just win a union and then have a company still determined to do everything possible to crush it. And I think, despite the limitations of the labor movement, which many of us are well acquainted with, the labor movement is still the only place that we can really turn to for hope against the fascist tide that is trying to drag us under. And I think the most encouraging thing or encouraging lesson of Starbucks Workers United is the way that people, and especially young people, but I think it's much broader than that, are turning to the labor movement as the only place where we can really achieve liberation across all of these different fights. So if you care about queer rights and trans liberation, you have to also care about organizing a union and giving people true autonomy in the workplace. Same if you care about racial justice. Same if you care about solidarity with Palestine. Of course, we've been trying to drag the labor movement a long way on that one, which is a longer story. But I think, again, there we showed that the only thing that Starbucks really cared about so far was when the community and people around the world started boycotting Starbucks over their retaliation against the union for supporting Palestine. And I think that's really the key to how we win liberation across all of our different fronts. Is the ruling class isn't segmenting themselves issue by issue. They understand how all these things are connected. We've got to do that too.
First, I want to say it is an honor to be here and to finally meet you, Jaz. Like, I have been enthralled with reading Get Out and Organize. I'm only allowed to talk about one thing. So the biggest thing that resonated with me is how on every campaign, whether it was with Nissan or Starbucks or Tesla even, how you found the work leaders and you got out the way, right? And that's such a hard thing we're seeing with big unionism right now, is they are hiring, this big army of, fresh-faced college graduates to go out to job sites and just talk down on workers. And it really takes workers, organizing workers, to build that power. So I was impressed on how you identified site leaders when you were out salting, and you were willing to go to the places that, I would say big labor has long written off, whether that was Nissan in Mississippi or Tesla or Starbucks. Prior to you going out with Al and the rest of the crew for Tesla, with the was it SEIU?
Workers United.
Workers United Upstate New York, and part of SEIU. Thank you. How they didn't want to do it. They thought it was a lost cause. And when you finally went out there and you built the infrastructure and the workers are out there doing the work, and all of a sudden SEIU and I was getting mad reading this chapter, y'all, all right? I was getting angry. When an SEIU rep went up to Jaz and said, "This is not about the workers," I wanted to throw the book. All right, I was livid. So I'm part of ASME. So I'm a big fan of unions and workers, but I am not a big fan of big unions that ignore workers. And this kind of, thank you. This kind of reminded me when, when we whenever reach out to Council 5, which I'm a part of, and we ask for help with strike funds, how they're not there for workers and workers on the ground. We're starving, we're hungry. We need to build that support with each other, but we're also fragmented. And I was inspired that you went out there and you had no excuses. You said, "I don't care if any of you are written off. I am there. I'm going to build this movement. I'm going to find the leaders, and I'm going to let them lead. I'm not going to take control of this." It wasn't about control for you. It was about empowering workers to build a better life for themselves.
Actually, that was a good introduction, also to kind of segue to what I was thinking about. I am on staff with a union. I'm an organizer with the St. Paul Federation of Educators. I'm also a member of, thank you, member right here. I'm also a member of the Minnesota Guild, so our staff are also unionized as workers. And so as I was reading, I actually started in the classroom, and when I was in the classroom, I, as a worker, was struggling with the constant day-to-day. I felt like I was trying to put Band-Aids on just like a broken leg of issues, and and I taught in a pre-K classroom in the school at the time had the highest homelessness rate, the highest poverty rate, the highest asthma rate in the city of St. Paul. And I got involved in my union, and the organizers that I worked with got out of the way, in so many ways, but also were like right there, like in case I stumbled, right? And I think that was so instrumental for me to learn how to be an organizer. And so when I'm reading this, what I'm thinking about, that it was just like so telling that the chapter about how to bust a union included these dynamics within the union, within SCIU, within that leadership, and like thinking about how we don't just want to build power, but sustain it, and how hard that is. You know, we have a contract every 2 years, and it is exhausting. Yep, and Minneapolis is, I know, I'm gonna like hand it to you. Minneapolis is, you know, staring down their own strike right now. I'm always thinking about, you know, I remember that first contract that I was a member of. I was on the bargaining team and had that experience of being like, we won these major things. It was like a landmark contract for St. Paul. It's one that we still talk about. It's like our story. And I remember going back in the classroom and being like, I think this is all still really hard. Like, it didn't solve everything, and we have to keep going. We have to not only like build that strength, but sustain that power. And so that's what I was like really like interested in your storytelling and your experience with it, of like, you know, building up the workers around you so that you stepped away to do another campaign, and the workers were there. They were ready to do the work, right? And that's because you got out of their way. They were doing what they needed to do to sustain the power. And I mean, 4 years later, I'm impressed that like their power is still there. Like, you're still going, and it must be, you know, it's a real grind to get through that. So yeah, I think that's kind of what I was thinking, and I appreciated it, because as a staff person, you can also get caught up in the timelines that you have to follow. You have grievances, you have investigations, you have contracts, you have paperwork to do, and you could sit and do your paperwork. And this is, I think, was a really good reminder, you know, that I try to keep to myself, like that radical respect for members, that truly like go find out what's going on and how to support folks, and don't get caught up in just like the bureaucracy of needing to like do those like everyday tasks that are really crucial. I don't want to say they're not. Like, you have to enforce a contract when you get it, otherwise it's meaningless. It's a meaningless thing if you don't enforce a contract. But you have to keep building it. You have to keep sustaining it. You have to keep going. So for me, that was the chapter, and like the piece that I really drew from it as like I'm carrying forward in my work is like remembering to say, hold on, take the time, go engage with the people who are most impacted, find out what needs to happen, and follow their lead. And don't just like be like, well, it's faster if I just do this right now by myself in this office, which I think can be the trap. And surely some of your folks at the top fell into the trap of that, right? So, yeah.
Okay, I hope these thoughts are coherent and like not rambly. But the part that really resonated with me about Jaz's book was the part where they described, and they kind of have this way that they describe it in the book, of being forced out of both Starbucks as well as Workers United at the same time. And they describe it so beautifully in the book. It really gives you the sense of being caught between a rock and a hard place, between like this company that you're trying to fight and the union that is like supposed to help you fight this company. When I started at Chipotle, it was in 2021, and I had just graduated college with a political science and history major, like right after the pandemic. So the job market was like really, really bad, although maybe now I'm getting a little nostalgic about it. You don't know what you have until it's gone, truly, okay? So during my time in college, I had been getting really radicalized, not only by 2020 stuff, but like reading about stuff that happened in Chile in like 1973. And so I wanted to get like a better idea of capitalism. And so I was like, well, you should like really try to find out like why there aren't fast food unions. Because it seems like there's steps that you could follow to like get a fast food union, but it doesn't happen, so there must be a reason. And so I got a job at Chipotle, and I got a copy of like Secrets of a Successful Organizer by Labor Notes, and I basically like my coworkers and I basically started like going through the steps in the book, and I was kind of straight up with the organizing committee, and I was like, yeah, I'm just like really curious, like I think this would improve our conditions if it was successful, but I'm really curious like why this like never happens. Like we might find out. It could happen. So we're following the steps. You are talking to your coworkers about issues. You're discovering new issues in the workplace. You're kind of like posing this question, like, what do you think the manager would take more seriously if you went in there alone or if we all went in there, right? Like getting this idea of like collective. And we keep expecting to hit this invisible wall where it's like, oh yeah, that's like why there's like no fast food unions. But instead of that, it just like keeps going, and it gets like almost like kind of out of control. And so we get to like over 50%, and we start talking to different unions, most of which like we talked to like a dozen different unions, and like most of them ghost us. But then we end up getting 3 unions that said that they would take us on. The Teamsters, the IBEW, and the IWW are our options. So we had this internal union vote, and we'd like decide to go with the Teamsters, and we start signing cards, and when those cards were on the shop floor, that's like when it felt really real. And so they file for an election, and then we become the first unionized Chipotle. So, yeah. Okay, well, don't clap yet. So through this process, we kind of had this mentality, and when you were organizing back then, like, you kind of had to be a Starbucks Workers United fangirl. So we were all like really Starbucks Workers United fangirls, even though like none of us worked at Starbucks. But we were like basically like reading like every article we could find, like trying to like closely follow the steps, like what were like mistakes that were done, like what were successes that were done. And we run into this real difficulty. It seemed like organizing our own workplace went smoothly enough. We had like a 11 yes to 3 no vote election, and that was like with Chipotle like really almost like focused on us totally a Ives Sauron style. They shut down this other Chipotle store, but they didn't shut down us, so like we squeaked by. But it seemed like these other Chipotle stores were like really struggling to unionize. But what we had that we were kind of taking for granted is that the Teamsters would tell us like, well, we are organizing Chipotle because in order for the Teamster union to stay relevant, we have to be making inroads in these like new sectors of the economy, especially as like the economy becomes more service worker oriented, right? And so about 3 years of this goes by, and the Teamsters kind of adopt this line that they aren't actually going to organize any other Chipotles, and that they are going to threaten and run a national campaign against Chipotle with the intention of like heightening the contradiction for Chipotle. So the idea is that Chipotle could end a national campaign against them if they were to only give a contract to one store, right? And then the Teamsters would be able to take that contract and go organize other Chipotle stores as like a concrete thing of what they could get. Does that make sense to everyone? Is anyone? Okay, it seems like a very straightforward plan, right? And at first, this seems like it has like real merits, and so we are like down for it. The Teamsters are threatening a national campaign against Chipotle. Chipotle, represented by Morgan Lewis at this time, is actually kind of, okay, please if I'm going too long too, like someone cut me off, but Chipotle actually is like buckling under this, right? So we get a TA on Just Cause, which is like really crazy as a fast food worker. And then we also get a TA on a system for a minimum amount of hours guaranteed every week, which is actually like our bargaining unit's biggest issue. Because at Chipotle, what happens, and at any fast food place, what happens is, you get 20 to 30 hours one week, and then you get like 5 hours the next week. It's like a very unstable situation. So this is huge. This like makes it like almost a real job. And after a few years of this, Chipotle starts to kind of call the Teamsters bluff about doing a national campaign. And we hadn't. So we really believed that the Teamsters would, kind of like carry through on like doing this national campaign. And what we kind of find out is we go through this huge bureaucratic process, and it turns out that they're like not really that interested in carrying out a national campaign. So at first they go, we're going to do a national campaign, and then they say, sorry, like, I promise this isn't me complaining. I hope this is giving you like an idea of like the structure of the thing. They say, we're gonna do a national campaign. Then they say, we're not gonna do a national campaign unless there's a boycott. And in order for there to be a boycott, you guys have to go on strike. And then we're like, okay, this sounds fair. And they also say that they'll pay us like full strike pay, right? And then they move from that to fuck a boycott. You guys just have to go on strike. And your best way to get this contract is by inflicting economic damages on Chipotle by going on strike at your one unionized store. And so this is like kind of like a sketchy proposition to us. But there's 20 workers at our store, and they have those take the strike vote. And so 9 workers vote yes, including me, with the assumption that they would like do a campaign like at least as an accessory to this, right? And then 2 workers vote no, one of which is like from a UAW family, and she says it's because they don't have like a good enough plan. Really like true, right? So the Teamsters say because we didn't have a majority of workers vote for this strike, that the Chipotle campaign is shelved, and that they won't do anything else with Chipotle until the PRO Act passes. So when I say all this to say, like, when we started, we were trying to get at this idea of, like, why aren't there fast food unions? And so to get to the end of this, it's kind of a bit of like a bad ending that you like, I didn't even know was possible, to be honest. Like, it's not even like a bad ending that like Chipotle like scaremongered about. Because what like essentially is the case is that all my coworkers at Chipotle have their wages frozen for associating with the Teamsters, but at the same time, the Teamsters aren't going to pursue anything to fight for those coworkers or to get a contract. So they're just kind of stuck in what a lot of my coworkers call like purgatory. As far as you're kind of stuck between this rock and a hard place. You know, your wages are frozen because you're associated with the Teamsters, but the Teamsters who you're associated with aren't actually going to do anything about it. And so their wages are frozen at $13.25. Really a rough situation. And it's like really hard not to feel guilty about that. But so when I was reading in Jaz's book, about how they felt forced out by both Starbucks, but then also Workers United, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they went there. But also, wow, like that is actually like a real element of the labor movement that is crucial for us to get right in order for the labor movement to be successful, I think. And so, you know, when we were organizing, one of the nastiest anti-union things I saw was Chipotle would put up quotes from the Teamsters for a Democratic Union site. So think about this, like you are a Chipotle worker unionizing, and there's this poster and it says like, here's what Teamster members have to say about their own union, right? And it's these TDU criticisms about the Teamsters. And I thought this was really shocking. And at the time, I had this mentality of, whoa, these people need to shut the fuck up. Because, this is like really anti-union stuff that they're saying about this union that like we are like in a blood and guts battle to be like trying to join right now. But obviously, like having gone through the process, I have a bit of a different idea about the situation now. So I think I think we really should be open to like a lot more self-criticism. We really should be open to these ideas of like collaborationism, especially as far as like the Teamster union goes. I mean, I'm so sorry, I promise I'll wrap up soon, but think about this idea, right? Like, we're not gonna work on this union campaign until the PRO Act passes, right? Like, I guess when all this Sean O'Brien Trump stuff was going on, I was kind of like, well, that's just, spectacle. Let me just focus on my shop floor issues, right? Like, in the issues of my coworkers. But obviously, that stuff, I guess trickle down is right in a certain way, right? Because that kind of mentality does influence very like materially, like what strategies like the union will choose to pursue and what strategies it will not choose to pursue. So, I think about this, and I think it's like really important that we are like taking the steps to make sure that the labor movement is in the best shape possible, so it can be accessible and it can actually hopefully do a campaign like this in the future. Okay, thank you so much, you guys.
Echo. The portion about that Jeremy beat me to a little bit. Also, this is still really cool. It's an honor to be here. It's really cool to meet the original Starbucks Workers United folks. So, on the matter of the no unorganizable workplace and a connection with staff folks, right, and the moral compromises we make. So, it's not we got to kind of, I think I say this a lot to people, to factory workers and blue collar folks. It's not a chicken egg problem. That's like a Walter Reuther quotation that I can't hunt down the last couple months, but he said that in the 50s, is that it's not a chicken egg problem or question, right? The way that we can change the political economy to be more fair, more equitable, more just isn't about waiting for the PRO Act. I agree. That's silly. You have to organize more workers in the labor movement. That's just true. I agree with that. And as part of that, we have to think big. We have to take the position that there's no such thing as an unorganizable workplace, and we have to fight really big, tough battles across industries and across sectors and all that. So whether that's a bunch of nerds with no personalities and just cool jobs, volunteering with the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, that's my story here too. Is that I want to volunteer I want everyone to go out and volunteer with the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. To my left here is Roxy. Roxy and I worked a lot over the last 2 years at McAllister College. They won their union recently, back in February. My 6-year-old and 3-year-old who are not here came to a lot of meetings, a lot of organized meetings. They had a lot of donuts, and cookies. So we have to take really big challenges, right? 1,100 workers at McAllister College isn't going to change the world right away, but doing that 100 times, 1,000 times is. So we really have to shoot big. I agree. And I know it's frustrating if staff doesn't do what they're supposed to do. And I know it's frustrating that a lot of what you see from people who are in charge of labor unions, how they allocate resources, how they decide to allocate resources is frustrating. I would like to think that I'm trying. That's not just about me, but again, it's about the moral compromises that long before I ever knew who Jaz Brisack or Casey Moore were, I was reading Richard Benzinger. So that's really cool. That's a cool story. So obviously the compromises that he's made over the many, many years that he's been in the labor movement are vast and difficult and uncomfortable. But to echo your sentiment, the labor movement's the only institution where we can do this stuff. So we have to. And Staff people make a lot of compromises. I'll just be honest with you. We make a lot of moral compromises. I don't really like being in southwestern rural Minnesota at 11 o'clock at night talking to factory workers who don't agree with my worldview. But that's the price we have to take, is that if we believe that there's no such thing as the unorganizable workplace, we have to talk to them too. That's frustrating. And they don't come to places like this, right? If you think that, if you think, let's be straight, right? If you think you're going to go to Marshall, Minnesota and tell dudes who wear Carhartts and don't have high opinions of rap music about Marxism, I would like to sell you some oceanfront property in Nebraska. That's not going to happen. They don't see the world that way. So we have to take that seriously, right? It's really, whether it's Mississippi or Texas or Marshall, anywhere. We want to win as many organizing campaigns as possible. We have to fight as hard as we can to get that done. I know for a fact there are at least 2 UBC members here who have expressed concerns over the years, like, hey, here's what we'd like to see more from our union. I agree with that. We should make that criticism known. We should talk about it honestly and openly, and we should try to fight for the labor movement that we want. But at the most fundamental core of what we're doing, we have to organize as many workers as possible into the labor movement and win as often as possible, because, and also too, another joke about who you're waiting to save you. People with law degrees and lots of college degrees aren't going to swoop down off of a hang glider and solve your problems. The National Labor Relations Board doesn't have a SWAT team to dispatch to make companies obey the law. That's bullshit. So you have to have a strong organizing committee. You have to be able to fight back against companies and make them pay a price for union busting. That's not going to happen with a bunch of administrative orders. That's silly. So this is a huge inspiration to be here, and like I said, this is really cool. So thank you.
Hello, can you hear me all right? My name is Jane. I'm a teacher at Northeast Middle School in Northeast Minneapolis, and a member of Minneapolis Federation of Educators. And full transparency, I was just gifted this book. I'm really excited about it, but in terms of talking about my favorite part, that is gonna have to be something I get back to you on. Which it's funny being a teacher, because I feel kind of like a student in a classroom discussion. I'm like trying to pick up on like the hints about what the reading was about, but I didn't do it. So I'm sure there's a lot in this book that I can relate to, but what I do know is just kind of about what's going on with the Minneapolis Federation of Educators, which I'm sure people have heard that we have filed an intent to strike. And I just came from a picket near my workplace. We're having pickets all around the city. Could be out as soon as next Tuesday. But I've also been on the bargaining team and the mediation team, sitting down with the district and bargaining, which has been a really, really crazy process. I guess, I have always, not always, but for most of my adult life have been like, pretty leftist and read a lot about labor, and like, I guess I feel like I underestimated the amount of classism that would happen, like just sitting at the table across from the people at the district who just seem to have this base assumption, like behind everything that they're saying, that teachers are lazy, and that if we get something in our contract, we're gonna take advantage of it, that we don't wanna do our job. My kind of like token issue, people have called me the poster child for it, is class size. Until this past Monday, I teach 6th grade, so I have 11-year-olds. I had 2 classes of 44 11-year-olds, 1 class of 43, 2 classes of 37, and a class of 35, I think. And my first year being a teacher, I remember having, it wasn't that long ago, it was like 4 years ago, I remember having 5 classes, and most of them were in the high 20s, and then there's this one class that was like 33 or something. And I remember just like bracing for that class. Like it was just like I really felt like at that point something happened where it got over 30 and it was just like chaos reigned. And that period was like the worst. And it really felt like I couldn't possibly be aware of each thing that was happening in the room. I knew that there was bullying going on, and I never wanted to be a teacher who would ever let that happen in their room. But I knew that it was happening, and there were comments being made that I couldn't hear and I couldn't hold kids accountable for. And I also just felt like so much less learning was happening in that room. So fast forward 4 years, and all of my classes are well above that, and I feel like I am doing a decent job of making sure everyone's learning, but I shouldn't have to be doing that. And the district has like many times implied that like more experienced teachers, maybe they should have higher classes, and then, or like, you know, highly effective teachers, whereas newer teachers or less highly effective teachers should have lower class caps. Like, so just different ways of trying to pit people against each other. And like at no point in your career should that be something that's expected of you, to be like one adult in a room of 44. God forbid like any sort of emergency happen. So that like weighed pretty heavily on me. Now staff adjustment has happened, which happens in October, and we got some more part-time people at our site. But I think the really kind of icky thing sometimes I think about a union of teachers, which isn't in many ways like Starbucks workers or Chipotle workers, is that I feel like teachers don't really see themselves as part of the working class a lot. There are these college degrees that teachers have to get, and oftentimes I feel like there's this idea that what we do is sort of like, you know, we're professionals and we shouldn't, you know, fight too hard or, you know, have unnecessary antagonism towards people at the district or whatever, because we're all professionals. And so I think that is another tactic that's often sort of used because we're not the only ones in our union. I'm a teacher, but our union also represents adult educators who don't teach birth through 22, which is my specific contract. And there's ESPs, educational support professionals, who don't make living wages, who often have 2 or 3 jobs. And a lot of the kind of classist language that is used by the district to talk about teachers, I feel like I can see replicating itself in the way that teachers can look at or talk about ESPs, and even adult educators who like, oh, they have adults, so they don't have to worry about like certain behaviors. It's like just further ways to divide us and turn us against each other. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. I'm sorry I can't relate it to something from the book, but I'm really excited to read your book. Yeah, that's all I got. Yeah, great question. Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's like a family and sort of like community group called Minneapolis Families for Public Schools that's putting on a number of rallies. There's an art build on Saturday at MFE, or MFT in Google Maps. We just changed our name, which is awesome, from Minneapolis Federation of Teachers to Minneapolis Federation of Educators, which I think is a good step in the direction of like having a union that represents everybody. But yeah, I would say, unfortunately, like I think the most effective thing to do would just be to point people to social media. Like our union accounts and the Minneapolis Families for Public School accounts are always reposting things you can do in terms of like getting in touch with people on the school board, or we're like trying to have different groups sign on to a letter that we wrote, basically saying what our demands are. So I would say most of that kind of depends on your role. If you have a connection to a community group like the library or something that could sign on to a letter, pressure in that direction would be good. If you have kids in Minneapolis Public Schools, then getting involved in the family group would be awesome. If you're just a community member, I would say contacting school board, and you know, if anyone wants to show up to these pickets and stuff, it's awesome to have that support as well. Yeah, am I forgetting anything, Jeanette? Donate to the hardship fund. You will get, if we don't go on strike, you will get it all reimbursed, guaranteed. But it really helps to like people who are about to potentially go on strike to hear that there's, you know, some support, some financial support waiting for them if they do that. There's also probably going to be a number of mutual aid initiatives starting at different schools if we do go on strike. That is also, yeah, I would also encourage people to contribute to, because that ends up being a big piece of it too.
Great. Thank you, Jane. Thank you. I just wanted to share one little piece of, I'm not usually a data person, but So we were hoping tonight that we might also have someone from the Doctors' Council that struck yesterday, 600 doctors, residents, assistants. And the reporter reporters are workers too, but the reporter for the Star Tribune said, well, this is not really such a big deal. After all, only 8% of doctors are union members. And I thought, today in the United States, only 7% of the workforce is in unions. The doctors are actually more highly organized than workers as a whole. Which my favorite adjective in the last 2 years has become confounding, a term that I learned from Douglas Ewart, the musician and intellectual. And I think much of this, and the stories of the Teamsters saying, wait for the PRO Act and so on, it's confounding. But it gives us space to push forward. So I'd like to open this up for comments, questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Twin Cities Labor Report, it's on Substack. Everyone please subscribe. One of the things that makes me really popular among most union staff is that whenever they come to the job at the beginning, I say, I'm a meat cutter, I work in a grocery store, and I say, have you ever seen, in a meat room? And because none of them have ever, well, maybe some of them have worked jobs, but like they haven't worked in grocery stores. They say, they say, sure. And then I show them the meat room, and it's because you don't need to work in a grocery store to organize grocery store workers, but you do need to know what makes the job different from like another retail job, right? So, and from the beginning, and I think to a degree today, that's the thing that's really set apart the Starbucks workers organizing from other organizations. You can tell, a lot of it is geared towards other Starbucks workers, and there's people involved who know what the difference is between working at Starbucks and working at like another fast food place is. They're really different industries and they're different jobs. Anyway, but the question I wanted to ask is, one of the things that I've been bumping against is the question of the labor bureaucracy, and specifically when it comes to Palestine. The really fascinating part about the Starbucks Workers Organizing Campaign to me is that the thing that wanted the most success is the one the union never talks about because it has to do with Palestine, right? It's the thing that really, really worked. And, you saw a worldwide boycott of Palestine. The only time I remember I was at the local coffee shop in Minneapolis, and there's a young Somali teenager talking to her friend, and she's like, yeah, we don't go to Starbucks anymore, And you have some really interesting parts of the book talking about how leadership of Workers United, and I'm sure SEIU, reacted when y'all were like, we're gonna go do this. So, but on the other hand, I see every time I look at like a photo of like, new organizing or whatever, there's always, a lot of times there's people wearing kufias in it, right? So it's this huge part of the labor movement, this huge part of, young culture and people who want to organize. But I've found that the labor movement doesn't want to talk about it at all anymore. Right, and I think a lot of that has to do with ties with the Democratic Party. But so I guess as to try and find a question out of all that, there's some kind of structural power that people who are in unions and have contracts have in terms of being able to vote out leadership and go to meetings and stuff that newly organized workers, you're not officially union members yet, you don't have as much. So how do you, for you, Jaz, and for other people who have done this, how have you tried to address the question of the labor bureaucracy and misleadership in our unions, while still in an organizing drive? Because you also want to, like Atulia, you said, you want to be big boosters of unions too. So, yeah.
so many things I could go on about in this question. And also, Paul, great to meet you. I've heard amazing things about you for a long time. So yeah, very cool to have you here. And now I'm working for the UFCW now, so I should probably go to a meet room, which I have not yet done. So maybe I'm that staffer now. We contain multitudes. But I think the Starbucks Palestine thing in some ways happened by accident, and I say that because I was the one who posted the tweet. And I didn't expect any of what happened. I expected that Howard Schultz would get mad because, he had been erratic for a long time. When he came to Buffalo to Union Bust, he gave this whole speech about, comparing Starbucks giving workers benefits to the Holocaust, and talked about how much his trips to Israel had moved him, but apparently not enough to compare himself to the Holocaust. Anyway, but I didn't expect it to create this firestorm within the union, where, as within a couple of days of posting the tweet, Rick Scott from Florida and Ben Shapiro were like, everybody should be boycotting Starbucks until they disavow their evil union. And then that was when Howard Schultz came out and was like, actually, I would close every union store if I could over this, but I can't do that legally. So instead, here's the list. Direct your hatred toward them. Also, I'm suing the union for copyright infringement over the logo because, they've confused Rick Scott and Ben Shapiro about whether Starbucks is endorsing solidarity with Palestine. And that was what kicked off this boycott. Meanwhile, within the halls of Workers United, there were very different conversations happening where, my boss was being asked, did you know your staff is supporting Hamas? And I was getting texts, are we supporting Hamas, question mark? It was all of the political education that we're gonna have to do real quick, or not do, because a lot of people were not very interested in listening to this. So anyway, I almost got fired for one of many times over all of this. But the really impressive thing was, the reason I had posted this was Starbucks workers had always been taking stances on issues, whether it was Black Lives Matter and racial justice, whether it was support for trans rights, and all of these different things, kicking cop unions out of labor federations, et cetera. And so none of these things were controversial. And solidarity with Palestine was not controversial among the rank and file. So when I thought nothing would particularly happen as a result of this, it was because we had been outspoken on other issues. Union leadership was not in favor of kicking cop unions out of labor federations, for example. We'd had a fight with them about that before the creation of Starbucks Workers United as a region of the union. But I didn't think that it would become the firestorm that it very quickly became. But workers at Starbucks, rank and file Starbucks workers around the country, rallied around this and said, we're not upset that the tweet was posted, we're upset that the tweet was deleted. And there was a vote open to workers at every union store on whether to release another stronger and more eloquently worded statement that this amazing worker, Neha Kremen in Oklahoma City, wrote. That explained why we were in solidarity with Palestine, signed on to the Jewish Voice for Peace statement, and contained we were getting sued for copyright infringement over our logo, so this contained the logo with the keffiyeh background superimposed on it. And workers voted by 97% to release that. And so there was this whole debate within the union leadership of even the few people who were supportive were like, well, but you're not, legally your own entity until you have a contract. But I think Starbucks Workers United had always sort of been operating in the public eye, if not the legal eye, as a very independent, quasi-autonomous union. And that was part of our strength in overcoming union busting and overcoming third partying. And so I think that was really a moment where the union still had this autonomy of workers out organizing the folks who were trying to shut this down and trying to say that, we were pro-Hamas because we were supporting Palestine.
I would also.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
I also wanted to touch in on that from personal experience. So a couple of months ago, AFSCME Council 5, they had their annual convention up in Duluth this year. And one of the resolutions that local 3800 University of Minnesota workers had brought up that local 2822 Hennepin County Clerical Maya Union we co-signed was to divest our pension funds, divest any and all funds from Israel. And it was an eye-opener. So we got body slammed on that. It was something like 200 to 100, and it was rough. Even in some of our sister locals in Hennepin County, there was a steward that walked up to the mic and she said, "From the river to the sea means drowning all the Jews." And I'd asked a couple of people from that local. I said, "Why do you support this person?" And their excuse was, "Well, she's a really good steward." And I'm thinking to myself, it seems to me that some locals will protect a steward at all costs if they're able to win, one or two grievances. But to me, that was unacceptable. But the more I thought about that, I thought to myself, well, a lot of these locals are, DOT road workers, prison workers, and so the more, what you'd call like progressive workers from Minneapolis, St. Paul, Hennepin, Ramsey County are definitely outnumbered by that. So, and a lot of progressive spaces, we kind of take this for granted. I've met a lot of progressives, a lot of radical comrades that believe that because you're in a union, that all of a sudden that you are pro-Palestine, you are pro right to choose, that you are, all these things that I would assume everybody in here might be in a monolith on. But for those workers, as Carson was saying, whether you're in Austin, Minnesota, or really out there, you're talking with somebody at Carhart's, the boogeyman in their life is somebody with the blue hair and a couple, and pronouns, right? Just take that from Carson. Blue hair and pronouns are the boogeyman in that world. And for us, the boogeyman here is, the billionaires giving us a hard life. So really, to get back to the Palestine question, that's hard because in the labor movement, people with degrees, without degrees, for a long time, people with degrees, didn't, they had a better standard of living, but inflation has caught up, and so now people with degrees, whether that's teachers and doctors, they have to realize you are part of the working class. You are not separate from the working class. You are with the ditch diggers, and the old wisdom's gone. So.
Yeah, Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think Paul already knows this, but for anyone who doesn't know, just a quick note about this kind of stuff within MFE. The recently reelected mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Fry. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he gave the union a really tough time when the group Minnesota Educators for Palestine wanted to and did have a workshop and a speaker come in and talk about Palestine and scholasticide and just sort of how to be educating kids in this time. And I guess somebody got wind of this and sent out an email to all members of Education Minnesota, and I guess it made its way to Jacob Fry, and he released a video saying that we'd invited an anti-Semitic speaker to come and encouraging people to speak out about it. And so I think the union office got thousands of emails and calls, only 4 that were from actual members of our union, saying, you can't have this person come and speak. And we were ultimately asked not to have the event at our union hall and had to move to a different location. And the whole thing just really sort of threw into question how much we were going to stand with Palestinians, and also sort of if we didn't already know, showed us where our local politicians are on that. But yeah, I don't know how much coverage that got. So for anyone out here who didn't know that, that is yet another piece of the rough legacy of our mayor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, in the mask, please.
So I'm a Jimmy John's worker. I'm here with a fellow Jimmy John's worker. Fellow Jimmy John's workers. So I've been really inspired by Starbucks Workers United. And I'm sorry I didn't read the book, so if this question is answered in the book, I'm sorry. But you have experience organizing on industrial shop floors, which I also have experience working at Boston Scientific in their medical manufacturing. And I feel the manager dynamics are very different from a shop floor manufacturing versus food service. And I was wondering how that plays into union organizing, because I'm much more around my managers than I was at the manufacturing floor.
Would love to talk more after as well, but I think, I think it's very case by case, especially in, these kinds of service industry jobs, about exactly what the strategy is for your specific manager. Like within Starbucks Workers United, we all had different relationships, between our stores and our individual store managers. And so like, at my store, we loved our store manager. She was relatively very good by the standards of the company. And so basically our strategy at first was like, in order to protect her, we're not gonna talk about, tell her about the union stuff because she doesn't have to have the same protections. I think, we wouldn't have won unions at Spot Coffee, the local coffee shop chain in Buffalo, that was sort of the predecessor campaign to Starbucks, without a whistleblower store manager, like putting himself on the line to refuse to rat out the workers who were organizing, even though it meant losing his job. Whistleblower store managers at Starbucks helped us in a lot of cases, and also were kind of quietly why certain cities had much less resistance than others. So, I think it's the labor law and the bosses that want to, make store managers who have a lot more in common with us than they do with the CEOs, into these class enemies. It does often make it harder to have conversations on the floor, obviously. And then, of course, the service industry also has a lot of managers who are, really abusive or, sexually harassing people, et cetera. And so, in those cases, higher management often will come in and fire the manager, and so like sort of inoculating about how it's beyond the manager. But yeah, I think either way, trying to keep it conversations outside of work and away from that is the key. But I think, there's some folks I think who are like, oh, we're gonna march on the boss, and if your store manager is beloved, that's not the boss you want to be marching on. So like figuring out those dynamics is key, and like the manager is not necessarily the problem.
I just want to tell a Jimmy John's story, and I don't know if you all know it. 17 years ago, workers at Jimmy John's organized here in the Twin Cities. The most active organizer was a former McAllister student named Eric Foreman. Eric was fired. He was in the IWW, and he had one of those moral struggles about could someone in the IWW file an unfair labor practice, because the IWW did not recognize the legitimacy of the process. Eric did file an unfair labor practice. Jimmy John's was ordered to bring him back. He had been out maybe 3 months. During that time, it was 2008, and the Republican National Convention was taking place in St. Paul. And there was this great idea. Eric was going back for his first shift at the Jimmy John's at the Mall of America. And there was a rally held at the light rail station on Franklin, and everyone was going to get on and go with Eric for a first cup of coffee when he had his first shift back. And the Twin Cities was, what we see now with ICE and masked cops, and so the cities were crawling with We called them Ninja Turtle costumes that the cops were in. And they were at the rally, and they got on the light rail. And when the train got to the Mall of America, the cops blocked the doors and wouldn't let anyone get off. And people who were not part of the struggle suddenly were demanding their right to shop. And that was an interesting learning lesson for them. Eric today is the primary organizer of the former Uber and Lyft drivers cooperative in New York City. And as I listened, and especially as I listened to Atulya, I thought about how my teaching of labor history has come to focus on how do the lessons that people learn get passed on, even if the struggle is defeated, what gets passed on to the next struggle? And here's Atulya with us here tonight, and the stories of Chipotle and so on. And so Eric is a phenomenal organizer, in part because of his experiences at Jimmy John. You all are still facing trying to organize there, and more power to you. And Eric has been here in this space when we did an event with Uber and Lyft drivers here. And I would be delighted to connect you. He lives in New York City. I'd be happy to connect you with him. But these are, histories that we're not taught in school, we're not told, and I don't want them to get lost. Please.
So here's where I out myself as a former Starbucks store manager. I was a manager here in Minneapolis around the time you guys were organizing, and I remember them pulling a whole bunch of managers from in town here to go union bust. They were smart enough to not ask me to go there. But shortly after that, they had all of the store managers in like a couple districts around here. We all got together and they trotted in the like high-paid lawyer types. We were in the IDS building and they like had us in this like fancy conference room and stuff. And they sat us down and did a like union busting, anti-union, like the whole song and dance for us with the presentation and how the union was just trying to make money off of your baristas. And I was also a former SEIU organizer. And so I might have derailed this union busting presentation a little bit. But it was interesting that a lot of the store managers in that meeting did not know anything about unions. They didn't know if they were good or bad. I would say a portion of them had the impression that they were probably good, and that they were kind of sitting through this and like very skeptical of these like very high-priced lawyers. And I think the one thing I will say is that like your manager can't help you. They can't interject on your behalf. Some of them are gonna be nasty and gross, but as an organizing committee and as an organizing group, you can do a lot to like inform the impression of your manager in terms of like what a union actually is, and that like in terms of the ultimate like class struggle, they are much closer to you than they are to the high-priced lawyers at the top of the IDS building. So, unless they're really, really terrible, like drop some little nuggets in there, and I. Yes. Well, the store manager who hired me knew, yeah, he did, but I had been hired before like the union organizing stuff had happened. And
We're the OG salt.
yeah, a little bit. But yeah, so anyways. I was at a bunch of stores. I was at the Canadian Pacific store, which was the first Starbucks store in Minneapolis. It just got closed. And then I was also out at Brooklyn Center for a little while, and kind of a smattering of all the different downtown stores. So, yeah.
Thank you. Please, Roxy. Oh, throw the microphone. There you go.
Thank you. Hello? Hello, it's on? Okay. On a personal note, it's really cool to meet Atulia and Jaz in person. I've talked with both of you separately a while ago, so it's just very cool. Yeah, I have two questions, mostly for you two, but also for other folks. I'm sorry I came late. The first is a question about scale. Looking at like the last upsurge in the 1930s, we organized 12 million workers. And looking at the upsurge in the 1960s, we had to organize 6 million workers. So if, like, at those current rates, we have to organize, we need to organize 48 million workers in order to get to 30% density. I know the groan in the room. I want to ask seriously, like, strategically, how do we get there? Because I think that number is something where, like, our brains shut off. And so I really want to ask you two, like, both how do we get to the scale? How do we build up those moments that need to happen in order to get the wave and then keep on organizing? But also, like, how do we get there? So that's my first question. I'm sorry. And then my second question is about age, because with all due respect to some folks in the room, there is sometimes a really huge lack of respect for young workers in the labor movement, like an ear shut off thing, and it's even among socialists and radicals and leftists. And like, as an 18-year-old, I was like, go fuck yourself, which didn't really work. And so I'm wondering for you two, like what that balance between like, hey, we are, folks who are actually doing this versus like, shut the fuck up. Like, what does that balance look like for you two?
Okay, I feel like this is not a helpful answer necessarily, but I feel like, I don't know, I don't think we can think about how we organize 48 million initially. Like, I thought we were gonna organize 1 or maybe 20 Starbucks stores if we were really lucky. And like, maybe people would want to organize, but more likely they would wait and see what happened. And if Buffalo got a contract, the enthusiasm exceeded my expectations very quickly. But, I think organizing is contagious. I don't think we know what the moments of like radicalization and overlap are. So like, I think we can do a lot of things to get ready and train folks. And, I think every organizing experience that people have sort of is a training and what they can, go and do going forward. And so, I think no organizing effort is wasted in that we're always planting seeds and learning how to do more things. But I think if we can get paralyzed by, is this enough? Nothing feels like enough, but if we don't do anything, then we're not doing any of the potential things that could get us there. And then regarding age, I feel like I've always identified as a boomer in terms of like, I don't know, how many folks here have watched Mary Tyler Moore? Probably lots because it's Minneapolis, but like no one my age has watched Mary Tyler Moore most of the time. So anyway, not a helpful answer, but I feel like, finding people to work with, like Richard Bensinger, who I think, again, I got lucky that was the first organizing mentor that I imprinted on, first union organizer I met. And, he'll look at, a 20-year-old barista and be like, I don't know, this is what I think, but what do you think? I don't know. And I think finding people like that, and there are amazing organizers like that, and that's really the hallmark of an amazing organizer, is possible. And then just, sort of treating everybody, equally regardless. But what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Will you restate your like young person question real quick?
There's a lot of times where like either for ideas or like organizing workers where like even older folks who are like progressive or left wing in the labor movement shut down, like they just don't have ears for like anybody who's under the age of like 30. And so I was wondering like how you balance the kind of confronting people and also like building relationships with folks because you have to, right? Like that's what you have to do.
Yeah. Okay. This is like a really good question. One thing I don't think we should like necessarily take for granted is that like labor organizing hasn't always been like something like young people have been like really interested in, which I think is like really cool and interesting. One thing I talked to Jaz about is like the Starbucks workers campaign is really remarkable for like tying, especially like the young queer movement to the labor movement in like such a foundational way, where a lot of like young queer stuff seems like pretty inseparable from like labor stuff in that way. Again, like not always the case. I mean, you think about, I feel like maybe like the most cartoonish example of this is like the hippies like versus hard hat stuff that you had like in the 60s, right, where you had these young anti-Vietnam college students who were getting like beat up by like I think like unionized construction workers, right? And obviously this is like overplayed in the media a lot, right, to like enhance a sort of divide. But I think there maybe like was like something there, right? Like there was this divide between like the like working class and like young people that I think is like really cool that it's like kind of like going away more significantly. I don't know how this like really addresses. Yeah, I guess like it would be like really like stuck up to say like, yeah, maybe like old people should just be like more grateful that there's like young people in the labor movement period. But I do think that's like part of it. But I also maybe think the reverse is also like that young people should maybe be like conscious that like there hasn't always been like a known like position or like archetypal like young like labor organizing thing for them that like older people in the labor movement have like a reference for necessarily. So and those damn pronouns. I'm just kidding. The other aspect about like how are we going to get to like the labor upsurges that we had in the 30s and the 60s, I like really have no idea about. But this is like something where I really do think about, you know, I think, not to get too ideological, right? But like accelerationism has like a bad rap as like kind of like a straw-manned idea of like, oh, things have to get worse, so like people will like want to radicalize and stuff, which I think it is actually like not really exactly what it is. It's when you like read like accelerationist stuff, a lot of it is just, I think like the general vibe is like the answers are going to be like in the future, like not the past, right? So it's not going to be like about like recreating like what happened there, but it's about going to be like, you know, you take a lot of stuff from the past to construct a future, to make some sort of like try like some well-informed but like weird experiments in like labor organizing and such, and then also like not making stuff worse on purpose but expecting stuff to get worse, like it did in the 30s especially, and being ready to like have organizations to take advantage of that. Stuff like that happens like really, like when things get bad, like things can either get worse or better like very quickly. And so it's like, I think one thing like going forward into the future is like, it's not going to be about like knowing stuff necessarily. It's about like having frameworks to kind of deal with unprecedented events, right? And I think like maybe the greatest framework you could have is just like solidarity. Like if your go-to instinct is always just to have like solidarity with like other workers, like other oppressed people in the world, and that is like something that you like default to every time, then that is like actually kind of strategically advantageous like for the labor movement, like leftism as a whole, because it makes it like a very reliable thing that other people can come to depend on, even if it isn't always strategic in these like moment-to-moment instances.
I'm just going to add one more thing. So I won't. This isn't long at all. I'm a simple country lady, just trying to get by on low information. But the way, and I know we talked about this over the last 2.5 years, it's just by coincidence, is to have people do this stuff and go find these people to go organize and to convince your friends, neighbors, relatives to be salts. Again, that could be low information, like bullshit staff knowledge. They didn't teach you how to, I don't know how to, that's why I joke about this with blue collar folks. Having a law degree in a blue collar union is weird. I don't know how to install doors and windows. They don't teach you how to do that at the University of Illinois Chicago. I'd have less debt. But come to find other organizers to talk about organizing, and then go be salts and volunteer for the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. Again, maybe that's too meat and potatoes, and that's not, that won't make a Marxist reading circle. I apologize, but that's what you should do if you want more organizers. You should do that. So,
I want to add just one more thing as like a more concrete example of like what like new organizing tactics like look like in the future. I'm sure like Jaz like wasn't necessarily like pilled on like accelerationism when they made that Palestine tweet. But I think that's like a really good example of it, right? So it's not necessarily this idea of like Jaz wasn't like, let's make stuff worse in the union, and like workers will like suddenly like get like more radical, right? What happened in that case, whether like purposely or like through kismet, was these contradictions that existed in like in Starbucks and like in the wider political economy were like pushed forward in such a way, and in the union, right, were pushed forward in such a way that led to a series of like escalating confrontations that actually ended up working out really well for the union, right? So that is like kind of an idea of like what the like accelerationism in practice like actually looks like, and how it could be useful for like a labor movement struggle.
I'm sorry, what did the tweet actually say?
Just solidarity with Palestine. With a photo of the bulldozer breaking through the barrier.
It was on October 7th, but that made it kind of hard.
So I'm going to put a close to this now. It's getting late. A little bit of time for people to talk informally with each other. Can we show some love to the panel, please? Yeah. I'm grateful to you all, and grateful to everybody that's here. And I think to leave with the idea that solidarity is the framework to take out into the world. It's a great gift for us to think about tonight. So thank you all.